So, inflation is 4.1. What, we don't talk about this often, but it can be a little bit dense, but the basket of goods and services and the cost of living now. So, some people look at 4.1%. Oh, wow, it's falling. That means the cost of living is going to get better. Let's explain why that's false. That's only some items in the basket of goods and services may fall. But the total basket of goods and services hasn't really fallen. It's just not growing very fast.
It's gone up, but not as much. And that's a really important distinction. Mark, I'll do my best to explain this.
I know it's a bit dense, but it's
dense, a bit thorny. Okay. The price of, and I'll use an example. The price of something goes from $100 to $110. That's a 10% increase, pretty clearly. That's your 10% inflation.
So let's just make it even a bit more simple, Steve.
Yep.
Let's just say, let's go back to something. Let's say the price of T-bone steak is $70 a kilo.
Yep.
And now it goes up. Let's start at $70 a kilo.
Yep.
So go through your example.
Goes to $77 a kilo because of whatever, the inflation pressures and all that stuff. That's a 10% increase. And the RBA and we say, oh, gee, that's a big increase in 1 year.
And let's assume we only got one item in the whole basket of goods and services.
T-bone steak. 77. Okay? Then, because people buy a bit less T-bone steak, something happens, the farmers don't produce as much, they produce more because they've got to think, oh, this is a great price, I'm going to add to supply. The butchers get lots of T-bone steaks and people think, oh, gee, okay. And then the price goes up to, say, $80. That's from 77 to 80. What's that? It's about 4% increase in price. So the price is still going up, but instead of 10%, it's only gone up by 4%.
Which is sort of what
which is lower inflation, but the cost of that steak has gone up.
So the cost of living is still high.
Still a pressure, correct.
So we don't want anyone to get confused with the good inflation number that we're carrying on about, by the way, which we predicted, but as meaning that the cost, because the people go, well, I'm scratched my head. The cost of living, I'm still going to Woolworths and I'm paying double the amount of money I was paying before.
Yep.
So, and that's the sort of reason why.
That's the issue, yes. Lower inflation just means that after that spike that we saw, and that's why inflation is such a bad thing. When it's entrenched in an economy, it's a killer. It's a bad thing for everybody. It really does undermine living standards. That's why the inflation target is still such a good thing. So just as an aside, 2 to 3 inflation, that's a good rate of increase. If everyone's getting 3.5%, 4% wage increases, they're keeping their head above water and doing okay. They're not swimming in money, but they're doing okay. That's why the inflation is bad.
Other items in the basket of goods and services are going backwards.
There are some, and this is the really amazing thing, the really interesting thing. And I've noticed it. I do the grocery shopping. Meat and seafood prices come down. Lamb, in particular, was down, I think, 12%. In the December quarter. So meat and seafood, the prawns at Christmas time, they were cheap.
I was going to the markets, prawns are $40, $35 a kilo.
Instead of $60, $70.
That was $60, $70 last year before.
For these gorgeous prawns, But so meat and seafood's come down. There's a big increase in supply and people are adjusting their spending. So that's coming down. Fruit and veggies, so food at the supermarket is actually coming down. Again, partly linked to weather problems of 6 and 12 months ago. You remember we had lettuces at $10 because there were floods in Lismore and all this other stuff. We're now growing them, thank goodness, and they're back to $3 each. So fruit and veggie prices are coming back down. Clothing prices are coming down. That's sort of a global thing. The low-cost producers around China and the rest of Asia produce all our clothes for not much. So clothing prices are coming down. So there are actually a couple of items within the and airfares have come down. A little bit of competition and
not as many people travelling.
Not as many people travelling for either business or holidays. So the airlines are saying, we better cut our prices.
Restaurants.
Still going up.
Still going up. So that's included in the basket.
Included in the basket.
That's services.
In services and the things that are the really, I don't know, because a lot of people pay these and they are still really stubborn. Dwelling rent and insurance premiums. They're still growing at 8-9%. They're really strong and people see them and they have a big impact on your cost of living. So you might be saving, a little bit of money on your fruit and veggies and your meat and your seafood, but your rent, which you have to pay every week,
and insurance
every quarter or every year, depending on what you do, they're going up a lot.
Yeah.
And that's why that cost of living is feeling more acute, even though the inflation rate is starting to tilt a little bit lower.
So that's important. We just want to make sure listeners understand And if you're looking at what is affordable and what's not affordable in terms of the market and how it's going to affect property prices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what's really important is to understand the cost of living is for the whole basket of goods and services is still rising, but it's not what inflation of 4.1% is telling us is not rising at the same clip that it was rising in previous periods.
And some of the items are actually coming down. Oh, the other thing that was very high...
But some are going up too.
Tobacco. That's the tobacco tax.
that
I
is
don't
tax
smoke,
on it,
and
yeah.
that's tax-related, so that's not a demand thing. However, it's part of inflation. If you're a smoker, I don't know, what cigarettes, $40, $50?
And alcohol
tobacco.
too. There's
And alcohol. There were this. Both of them went up. I'm surprised
But
about
they were
alcohol.
taxes.
Yeah, I think it was tax rate because, the wine...
But price of
there's a
beer's
glut
gone up. I know
wine.
that.
Yep.
So, but now that's the 4.1. That's
Yep.
the price of goods and services have increased overall by only by 4.1%, which is not where we want to be, but better than where we were. In terms of what the Reserve Bank looks at, you just mentioned something about alcohol and tobacco. Now, they do strip out stuff, so
Yep.
you would ordinarily expect the Reserve Bank to strip out an increase in price of tobacco and alcohol because it's just a tax.
Yes, it's not a demand and supply
It's
issue,
not
which
driven
is
by
what they
people, yeah.
try to target.
So,
through interest rates, yeah.
have we got any insight into underlying inflation?
Yeah, the underlying or trimmed mean, without getting too technical, has come down as well.
So what are we looking at
It's
there?
4.2, so it's a smidge higher than the headline figure. It didn't quite peak as at the same level as headline inflation too, because that was, I think, partly linked to petrol prices too, if you recall back 18 months ago, whatever it was. So there's a few things that, because the RBA adjusting interest rates will not impact on the global price of oil. We just import it, and if there's conflict in the Middle East, the price goes up, and that's it. And the RBA take that out because they will not influence that particular item. What they do influence is what you and I and all the listeners spend their money on. They think, oh, gee, I'm going to pare back my spending. And this is where we get into this discussion on essential items like rent, insurance, food, essentials.
Building costs.
All that's correct. Discretionary items are, tobacco and alcohol, restaurant meals, those things. You don't have to have them. Travel, correct. You can just sort of drive your car to the south coast, have a lovely holiday there rather than jumping on a plane and things. So they do influence demand in that sort of way. So there's the essentials and the discretionary spending. There's the things that they influence with interest rates as opposed to things which sort of get imposed on us from abroad, like oil's the most commonly known one.